Let me introduce to some and present to others, Brother Abdul Halim, also known as Don Blas. And most of you all know he may be right this up this way, so it's not really lowing him. Now, I met this brother a couple of weeks ago, just kind of on humbug. We were also at an event, family, fathers and men in the lives of youth, and we kind of instantly connected. And ever since then, it's just kind of been an upward trek. And it hasn't been that long, but we've gotten some incredible progress and hopefully some good work done and good work to come. But without further ado, Abdul Halim, also known as Don Blas, is a father, son, husband, brother, humanitarian, social activist, friend, full of life, zeal, and passion. He's the CEO of Timeless Multimedia Company, the founder of Rags to Redemption, a member of Family, and FLTI. So I'll turn the floor over to him and let him get on with the presentation. Thank you all for coming.
All right. How's everybody doing? So I was asked by my dear brother, Henry Price, to do a presentation on the school-to-prison pipeline, criminal justice reform. And although I've been a statistic of both, while doing the research, I was put in awe. It was very depressing. I felt helpless at times. My own personal story, my own personal experience, my defining moments, which led me to this conclusion to do this work, started at a very early age. So at about 7, 8 years old, I remember sitting in the church house with my family, asking my mother who this was on the fan, this image with white skin, blonde hair, and blue eyes. Who is this image? This is your Lord and Savior. I rebuked that immediately at 7 years old. No, it can't be my Lord and Savior because he don't look nothing like me. This was the reasoning of a 7-year-old child. But since my mother told me this, part of me wanted to believe it, part of me rebuked it. But what ended up happening, I would go home and I would spend long, maybe an hour and a half in the bathtub. Take a whole bar of soap and I would attempt to scrub this thing off of mine. Because I want to get to that Lord part. Because if that's how God looks, then this must be the opposite of that. So this began the cycle of self-hate. I want you guys to realize that self-hate, when we are taught that someone else is more powerful than us, someone else who doesn't look like us has dominion over us, we can't do anything but learn to hate ourselves. That was the first experience. The second experience, right around 8, I saw Roots for the first time, Alex Haley's Roots. And I saw people who looked like me being treated like animals. And I didn't understand that. At 8 years old, I'm looking at this like, well, what is this? And I remember going to the first grade. I'm in the first grade, Miss Dupree's class. And after seeing this, I remember I was on the playground and I found a broken chain. And we're standing in the line to leave. And there was a white young man in front of me named Todd Holmes. And based off of what I saw in Roots, I took that chain and I slashed his back. And that was my first time being suspended from school. But it's self-hate. These are the images. If you could do that to me, why can't I do it to you? This is my thinking. If you could do that to me, why can't I do it to you? From that point, it led to middle school. Okay, we moved out of Denver, moved into Aurora. I'm in middle school now, and in a suburban area, right? And I remember being suspended because I was blamed for inciting a race war, which I had nothing to do with. I was in a suburban area with Europeans who love to use the N-word. But I was a fighter. So you're not going to call me that. There's consequences to that type of conversation. There's consequences to those type of actions, as there should be, right? So I was suspended maybe a week before school ended. So I'm at home. It just graduated into high school to the point to where I was expelled from all Aurora public schools. Let me tell you why. In the school newspaper, the publicist at the time, she put, "Niggas with attitude clothing should be banned from Aurora Central High School." I'm in math class, and I see a bunch of people knocking on the window. And it's my peers. Look at this. Because they knew who would say something about it. They knew who would stand up. We marched right over to the main building into the principal's office, and I put it on the principal's desk. I want to know who's responsible for this. I want to know who's responsible for this. Who put this in the newspaper? So it's a ruckus now. Everybody's coming out of class to see what's going on. So now we've carried this conversation into the hallways. And I asked, what exactly is niggas with attitude clothing? Define this for me. They said it's the matching baseball cap with the matching baseball jacket. So as I look around, I saw a lot of the white kids wearing the matching baseball cap with the matching baseball jacket. So I said, okay, so when they wear it, it's sports paraphernalia. But when we wear it, it's niggas with attitude clothing. They can parade around in it all day. But if we wear it, we get suspended. This was way before Columbine, right? With the zero tolerance policies happening after Columbine. However, this is what ultimately led to my expulsion out of all Aurora public schools behind standing up for what I believe. I went to a Denver public school where there was plenty of trouble to get into, plenty of alcohol, plenty of drugs, and I partook. I started cutting class. My teachers took a liking to me, so they just shuffled me through the system. But by that time, I had what is called a silent jacket. I had a silent jacket. I had a record for trouble in school, which schools communicate with the police, right, with the law. So now I have this silent jacket that is going to be with me for the rest of my life. Okay, so now, this is my personal experience with the school to prison pipeline, because by the time I was 21, I was nearly killed. I got shot in my chest. This is where that cycle of self-hate led me to. But God preserved my life. Even though I had felonies at 21, 22 years old, that's not natural. And I was just labeled as a bad young man, as a menace. He's different. He's a troublemaker. Well, through the research, what I've learned is that wasn't the truth. So when we talk about the school to prison pipeline, the home to school to prison pipeline, criminal justice reform, foster care, the statistics that deal with fatherless homes, how those children end up, what I learned was 40% of students expelled from U.S. schools are black. 70% of students involved in in-school arrests or referred to law enforcement are black. Black students are 3.5 times more likely to be suspended than white students. Black and Latino students are twice as likely to not graduate high school as white students. 68% of all males incarcerated don't have a college or don't have a high school diploma. These are real numbers. I was thinking I was the only one because I was made to think that I was the only one. But this is a national and a social justice crisis. This is an educational crisis. 61% of the overall prison population rate is black and Latino males, yet we only comprise 28% of the population. So now we have to ask ourselves, is this by accident or is this by design? Some of us slip through the cracks, right? But the majority, we're talking about the majority. 1 out of 3 African American males will be incarcerated in his lifetime. When we talk about foster care, and these are statistics that I learned during this research, 70% of all inmates incarcerated in California were foster care. We're in foster care. Currently, the U.S. has the highest youth incarceration rate, with 3 out of every 100 youth serving time in state-operated facilities. I remember in the 9th grade being challenged to a fight by a guy twice my size, a white guy, and I took the challenge. I accepted it. Yeah, I'll fight you. Where you want to fight? Where you want to do it? I said, let's go across the street to the racquetball court. All right. I'm learning the custom. I'm new to the school. I'm new to Central. Okay, so this is, at the middle school we had Scrap Alley. That's where we had our riots. But now it's a whole new, this is what I'm here for. I mean, I'm not here for education. I've learned, and this is what I've been told. It's just been pounded into me that I'm a troubled youth, that I'm a juvenile delinquent. I accepted it. All right, let me be the best troubled youth and the best juvenile delinquent I can be. Let's go to the racquetball courts. We get to the racquetball courts. Great big guy. He's swinging at me. And I'm moving and I'm trying to figure it out because his arms are longer than mine. So I'm strategizing. I'm trying to figure out my angle. And all of a sudden, I see a fist come from nowhere and hit him in his head. It was my brother. My friends had went and told my brother, hey, your brother's over there, and this is what's happening. So we took care of the situation. We're not ones to jump or impose our will upon anyone. However, that's how that happened. Maybe 30 minutes later, the police showed up to my mother and father's house. My mother and father weren't there, it's just my brother and I. They didn't knock. They opened the door and walked in. I'm coming downstairs with some scissors. I was doing something upstairs. Officer, I need you to put those scissors down. Walked through the house. When my father came home, he was furious. We made a complaint to the police department. They were suspended without pay for 3 days. But my question is, what would make these officers feel like that was all right? What would make them feel like, okay, they heard this side of the story and they took it to be true? They didn't care about my version. They didn't care what I had to say or what really happened. I was already indicted. I was already convicted. Isn't this the story of far too many black men in America, far too many Latino men in America. And what's happening is it's beginning to plague white neighborhoods. It's more than a racially biased situation. It's becoming class and caste based. Right? So now America, and it says in the last days, they will cast out their own. And this is what's happening. So, in talking about criminal justice reform, in looking at the disparity that exists for youth in urban cities, I was part of an organization about 5 or 6 years ago called It Takes a Village. And what we did, each member sponsored a young man that was involved in the criminal justice system. The young man I sponsored, his name was Don Gillespie. 11 years old, on his third dope case, looking at 20 years. So I went to Arapahoe County on his sentencing date. And his attorney, he was working pro bono, but he wasn't a public pretender, a public defender. So with Mr. Gillespie, when he was called, I was asked to stand up. And his attorney said, this is Mr. Ali. He has committed to spending 20 hours a week with Mr. Gillespie in mentoring and letting Mr. Gillespie shadow him. Mr. Ali is a pillar of the community, has his own business. He has the wherewithal to help this young man. This young man never knew his father, and his mother was addicted to drugs. He had a little sister whom he had to feed at 11 years old. So when they called him up, and after introducing me to the judge asked this 11-year-old boy, is there anything you'd like to say? Now, for those of us who deal in psychology, psychiatry, we realize that the prefrontal cortex is not even fully developed until a child becomes 25. It's an 11-year-old boy. What can he say? What do you expect him to say? What do you expect him to say? What is he going? Where would he speak from? Even if he had to say, where would he be speaking from? He lifted his chest and his head, and he said, no. No. The judge proceeded to give that young man 10 years. The judge proceeded to give that young man 10 years. So I want to just deal with a couple of statistics with you all, just so we know how serious the situation is. I've also identified some action steps to possibly bring remedy to the situation, because there is no overnight solution. And what ends up happening as I'm doing my research, I'm learning things like different policies. There was a policy during the times of slavery called meritorious manumission. Now, this was a policy that was imposed upon slaves by their masters that would say, if you told on other slaves who were planning a revolt, you can get benefits, you can become a freedman. If you provided some type of medicine that can cure the master's family, you can get some type of relief Now, and I use that example with meritorious manumission to say what is happening even from then until today with the mandatory minimums that are going on in the federal system. In order to get off, all you got to do is tell on. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. To reduce your consequence or to reduce your sentence. And one of the things that we have to look at is, does the punishment always fit the crime? Does the punishment always fit the crime? And how are children affected when the family unit becomes broken? How are the children affected? Let's look at that. With this young man, Don Gillespie, never knew his father. His mother is addicted to drugs. So what ends up happening? He becomes the head of his household. What 11-year-old boy do you know that can successfully head a household without instruction? He never had. Never even exposed to a man. So what ends up happening to his little sister? What happens to that little girl? Where do you think she is right now? If you had to imagine. If you had to imagine. Where is she? What do you think she's going through? When we deal with the, and I'm going to regress, foster care to prison situation. What I've learned, youth of color are more likely than whites to be placed in the foster care system. The foster care system has become a breeding ground for the criminal justice system. So we have to understand the conspiracy and the connectedness that, first of all, the police have with the schools for troubled students. There's communication there. There's communication there. So those troubled students, they now have that silent jacket. With the foster care system, it's the same thing. And most of those, one thing that the foster care system used to be, once upon a time, the foster care system was just used while a parent was going through rehabilitation, or while a parent or both parents were finding a place to live based off of a disparity, homelessness, joblessness, whatever. The child was under a roof and the child had some type of comfort. That's not the case anymore. These children are being thrown away. They're being thrown away. And most of them look like me. Most of them look like, some of them look like you. But most of them look like me. 50% of children in the foster care system, 50% are black. 30% of foster